In the quietest hours of a winter night, when the world seems to hold its breath beneath a canopy of stars, it appeared, a soft glimmer caught in the telescope's patient eye. Not with fanfare or cosmic drama, but with the subtle introduction of a distant stranger arriving at our door. Theresi Atlas, they named it, catalogued among billions of celestial wanderers, yet immediately set apart by its solitary journey. The astronomers at Mauna Kea first noticed its unusual trajectory, not the familiar elliptical embrace of our sun, but a straight line cutting through our solar system like a silver needle through dark fabric. It came from elsewhere, from beyond our familiar neighborhood of planets and debris, perhaps from another star entirely, now long dead or forgotten. And in that moment, humanity glimpsed something it had always suspected, but never confirmed. We were being visited. The data was analyzed in hushed tones across observatory floors worldwide. Calculations traced its path backward through the void, beyond the heliopause where our sun's influence fades to whisper, past the Oort cloud's scattered memories, into the deep interstellar medium, where stars are merely distant islands in an endless sea. 5 years, they determined, since it had crossed the invisible boundary of our solar system. 5 years of silent approach, unseen and unknown by the very beings who would eventually become captivated by its presence. How long before that had it drifted? Centuries? Millennia? Perhaps longer than human civilization itself had existed, a traveler from so far away that distance became indistinguishable from time itself. Some journeys begin long before we notice them, silent arrivals centuries in the making. Scientists called it an object, a term as sterile and impersonal as the vacuum through which it sailed. Interstellar Object Number 2, following in the wake of Oumuamua's brief and puzzling visit years before. The language of astronomy is precise, but often lacking in the poetry that such visitors deserve. In the online forums and beneath stargazing tents in remote deserts, others used different words: messenger, wanderer, pilgrim, words that carried the weight of intention, of purpose. The dreamers among us sensed something the spectrometers couldn't measure, that familiar feeling when a forgotten letter arrives decades after being sent, carrying voices from another time. In the space between what we observe and what we feel, the true nature of mystery often resides. The initial images came through on screens around the world with surprising clarity, a fuzzy core of light surrounded by a soft, greenish glow. But unlike the typical dusty snowballs that occasionally grace our skies, 3i Atlas moved with an unusual grace. Its rotation seemed irregular yet not random, its outgassing patterned rather than chaotic. The tail did not simply trail behind as physics would demand, but appeared to ripple and wave like a flag catching cosmic winds. When the enhanced images were processed, removing the noise and clarifying the signal, even the most skeptical observers fell silent. For in the comet's movement, there appeared to be something alive, not in the biological sense that we understand on Earth, but alive in the way that patterns themselves can suggest consciousness, purpose, intent. Sometimes the universe speaks most clearly in patterns we almost, but not quite recognize. The Hubble Space Telescope was quickly redirected. Its ancient but faithful eye turned toward this unexpected visitor. The James Webb followed, its infrared vision peering through the veil of dust to see what lay beneath. As data flowed into waiting computers, a curious phenomenon emerged among those studying the images. Conversations drifted from technical jargon into unusual territory. "It's almost as if," began sentences that never quite finished. Trained scientists found themselves reaching for metaphors instead of measurements. For what they were seeing was not merely ice and rock hurtling through space. It was a story written across darkness, a narrative etched in light and shadow, in eruption and stillness, in approach and eventual departure. In the presence of the truly unknown, even science begins to sound like poetry. What makes certain celestial events resonate so deeply within the human spirit? Perhaps it is the recognition of ourselves in the cosmos. Tiny, fragile beings adrift in immensity, seeking connection across impossible distances. As 3i Atlas grew brighter in our skies, people from all walks of life found themselves drawn to news of its progress. Something about this particular visitor struck a chord that vibrated beyond scientific curiosity. In its silence, there was a strange familiarity, like encountering an old friend whose face you cannot quite place. The comet carried no message we could decipher, transmitted no signal we could detect, yet in its very presence there seemed to be a communication taking place, wordless but profound. We have always looked to the skies seeking answers, but rarely do the skies look back with such apparent intention. The first color-enhanced images revealed structures within the comet's coma that defied easy explanation. Tendrils of glowing material arranged in concentric patterns, filaments that twisted and braided like living things. Computer analyses searched for natural explanations, gravitational effects, electrostatic forces, interaction with the solar wind. All plausible, all insufficient. For in the slow-motion dance of dust and ice, observers could not escape the impression of witnessing something deliberate, something composed. When time-lapse sequences were assembled, showing the comet's behavior over days rather than moments, the sense of witnessing something alive only intensified. It was not just moving through space. It was moving with purpose, its journey both physical and somehow expressive. There exists a thin boundary between natural phenomenon and apparent intelligence, and in that liminal space, our deepest wonders are born. As winter turned to spring, Three-Eye Atlas grew not just in brightness, but in the public imagination. Children made drawings of the comet with faces hidden in its glowing heart. Poets wrote verses about its solitary journey across the void. Musicians composed pieces that attempted to capture its silent passage in sound. Even those who had never before shown interest in astronomy found themselves stepping outside at night, searching the sky for a glimpse of this cosmic wanderer. Something about its story, this journey from beyond, awakened an ancient human intuition, that we are not alone in the vastness, that the universe is not merely a collection of dead matter, but a living story unfolding across billions of years. Perhaps what truly captivates us is not the visitor itself, but the possibility it represents, that somewhere in the endless night, something remembers we exist. In the third month of observation, a team at the European Southern Observatory captured something unexpected. A brief, localized flash from deep within the comet's nucleus, too regular to be impact, too sustained to be reflection. In the hours and days that followed, similar phenomena were recorded by observatories across the globe. Pulses of light, barely perceptible against the comet's natural luminosity, yet undeniably present in the data. When the patterns were analyzed, mathematicians found sequences that seemed almost like language, repetitions, variations, permutations that hinted at information rather than random occurrence. No one dared use the word signal in peer-reviewed publications, but the question hung in the air of every research institution: what if this distant traveler was not just passing through, but reaching out? And so began our strangest dialogue, with a visitor who spoke only in light and shadow, pattern and pause, presence and silence. As Three-Eye Atlas crossed the edge of our solar neighborhood, that invisible boundary where the sun's gravitational whispers begin to be heard, something remarkable occurred. The cameras, now trained on it day and night from observatories across our planet, captured a glow that pulsed like breath. Not the steady reflection of sunlight that comets typically display, but something rhythmic, almost organic. Its tail, extending millions of miles behind it, shimmered with waves of green luminescence that reminded observers of aurora borealis dancing across polar skies. Each wave seemed to ripple outward from the nucleus before fading into the blackness, only to be followed by another and another in patterns that defied conventional cometary physics. The cosmos had sent messengers before, but none that seemed to breathe. Astronomers noted the strange rhythm of these pulses, irregular, almost deliberate. Their instruments recorded fluctuations that followed no known pattern of cometary behavior. Some suggested it was simply an unusual rotation, perhaps caused by an asymmetrical nucleus tumbling through space. Others proposed interaction with solar wind or outgassing from subsurface pockets of volatile compounds. All plausible explanations, all somehow insufficient when matched against the visual poetry unfolding on their screens. For there was an undeniable elegance to these fluctuations, a complexity that hinted at information rather than chaos, at expression rather than accident. In the silence between scientific explanations, a different kind of understanding began to form, one too fragile yet to be named. The media attempted to translate these discoveries for the public, but found their usual vocabulary inadequate. Terms like unusual activity and anomalous behavior failed to capture what was unfolding in the sky above us. How does one describe the indescribable? How does one communicate the experience of witnessing something that exists at the very edge of comprehension? News broadcasts showed the time-lapse footage of 3I Atlas's pulsations, its tail's undulating waves, but could offer little in the way of explanation. And in that absence of definitive interpretation, something beautiful happened. People began to form their own relationships with the celestial visitor, unmediated by expert opinion or official narrative. When science falls silent in wonder, humanity remembers how to see with ancient eyes. Beneath the frozen shell of 3I Atlas, something was awakening. Thermal scans revealed heat signatures where none should exist, warm cores within the icy nucleus that defied the absolute cold of interstellar space. The instruments couldn't lie, yet what they revealed seemed impossible. A comet approaching our sun should indeed begin to warm, to release gases trapped for eons within its frozen matrix. But these heat patterns emerged too early, appeared too organized, emanated too specifically from certain regions rather than the sun-facing surface as physics would predict. It was as though something within the comet was generating its own warmth, stirring from a hibernation that had lasted longer than human civilization itself. Some awakenings take millennia. Some transformations occur in spaces we cannot see. Observatory directors extended viewing times, postponed other projects, reallocated resources. 3I Atlas had become priority one across the global astronomical community, not through any official declaration, but through the irresistible pull of mystery itself. Careers were gently set aside as scientists found themselves drawn into longer hours, deeper analysis, more intense scrutiny of this singular object. What began as professional interest had evolved into something more personal, more profound. The comet had become not just a research subject, but a relationship, a presence that demanded not just observation, but a kind of reverence, a quality of attention that transcended standard scientific protocol. Even the most rational minds can recognize when they stand before something sacred. With 3I Atlas continued its journey inward toward our sun. Its behavior grew increasingly complex. Jets of vapor rose from deep fractures in its surface, erupting in glowing plumes that extended thousands of kilometers into space. These were not the typical outgassing events seen in ordinary comets, controlled primarily by solar heating, but appeared to originate from within, as though the comet itself was breathing out secrets from another sun. Each eruption followed patterns that mathematicians struggled to predict, that physicists hesitated to explain. There was an undeniable rhythm to these exhalations, a cadence that felt almost like communication, a Morse code written in ice and light across the darkness. It was as if the comet was sighing out memories of worlds we had never seen. The comet's body trembled with these eruptions, its form seeming to reshape itself through each release. Every breath painted new streaks of wonder across the black canvas of infinity. Azure trails mingling with emerald veins, violet filaments twisting through golden mists. The spectroscopic analysis of these emissions revealed chemical signatures never before detected in cometary material. Compounds that should not exist naturally, isotope ratios that told of origins beyond our stellar neighborhood. With each eruption, 3I Atlas wrote another verse of its cosmic autobiography across our skies, a story of formation around distant stars, of journeys through molecular clouds where new suns are born. They've passages near worlds we could only imagine. Some travelers carry not just matter but memory, echoes of places beyond our knowing. In quiet rooms around the world, data analysts began to notice something peculiar in the timing of these eruptions. Patterns, not the random distribution one would expect from purely physical processes, but sequences that repeated, that evolved, that seemed to build upon themselves like movements in a symphony. Some said it was coincidence, a human tendency to find meaning in randomness. Others thought it was rhythm, an echo of some cosmic clockwork we no longer understood. As they plotted these events against time, structures emerged from the numbers, symmetries and proportions that appeared almost composed. The comet was not just expelling material, it was doing so with mathematical precision, with what almost appeared to be artistic intent. Data showed symmetry in chaos, beauty in disorder, and in that unexpected harmony, We glimpsed something beyond our science. The scientists watched in silence as their computer screens filled with these patterns, visual representations of a phenomenon that seemed to exist at the boundary between the known and the unknowable. The universe hummed a quiet melody of precision and mystery through the medium of this distant traveler. Those who listened most carefully began to sense that 3i Atlas was not merely a passive object responding to physical forces, but something more akin to an instrument, perhaps even a performer, expressing something essential about the cosmos itself. Not through sound, but through light and motion, eruption and stillness, approach and eventual retreat. What if the universe itself was trying to remember something through this cosmic messenger? In university lecture halls and online forums, debates raged about the significance of these patterns. Were we witnessing natural processes we simply didn't yet understand? Or was there intention behind these rhythmic emissions, these mathematical sequences written across space in light and dust? Occam's razor suggested the former, that the simplest explanation involving known physical laws should be preferred over more exotic interpretations. Yet as the data accumulated, even the most skeptical observers found themselves drawn toward questions that ventured beyond the safety of established science. What if? What if this visitor carried within it not just the physical memory of distant star systems, but something more profound? Sometimes the simplest explanation is that we are not yet simple enough to understand. As weeks passed, a strange rhythm emerged in the comet's behavior, patterns of activity followed by periods of quiescence, eruptions that occurred not randomly, but in sequences that appeared almost composed. Some researchers began tracking these cycles, plotting them against time and position. What they discovered left them reaching for new frameworks of understanding. The periodicity of 3i Atlas's emissions followed mathematical relationships, golden ratios, Fibonacci sequences, prime number intervals that appeared too precise to be coincidental. It was as though the comet was keeping time to a cosmic metronome whose beat originated somewhere beyond our solar system. The strange rhythm carried echoes of a music we had forgotten how to hear. Observatories worldwide coordinated their efforts, creating a continuous timeline of the comet's activities. When viewed as a whole, these records revealed cycles within cycles, patterns emerging at multiple scales simultaneously. 3i Atlas would erupt in intense activity for periods lasting precisely 89 minutes, followed by quietude for 144. These numbers, both Fibonacci sequence values, were repeated with variations that themselves formed larger patterns. Mathematicians noted that such precise timing couldn't be explained by simple rotation or solar interaction. Something more complex was at work, either physical processes we did not yet comprehend, or something that uncomfortably resembled intention. In the precision of these cosmic rhythms, we heard whispers of an order beyond chaos. The night sky above desert observatories seemed to hold its breath as scientists worked in reverent silence, tracking each pulse and flare from the distant visitor. The stars themselves appeared to lean closer, listening to this conversation between human instruments and interstellar traveler. For conversation it had become, not in words or even in clear signals, but in a dance of observation and response, attention and revelation. Those who spent the most time with the data began to feel that 3i Atlas was not merely being studied, but was somehow studying us in return, responding to our attention, perhaps even adapting its emissions based on what instruments we turned toward it. The quiet vastness around it seemed to lean closer, listening to a dialogue older than language itself. As 3i Atlas moved through the outer reaches of our solar system, something even more unusual began to manifest. The magnetic field surrounding the comet shifted unpredictably, bending space around it like ripples on still water. Sensitive instruments aboard space probes detected fluctuations that defied conventional models of cometary interaction with the solar wind. These fields pulsed and twisted in complex geometries, extending far beyond what the comet's size and composition should generate. It was not merely passing through our neighborhood, it was interacting with it, responding to subtle electromagnetic currents, altering the very fabric of space in its vicinity. Even the invisible forces between worlds seemed to recognize this visitor as something extraordinary. Scientists working with the most sensitive Magnetometers available noted how their instruments trembled in the comet's presence, how nearby readings altered in ways that suggested not just physical disruption, but almost a form of communication. The magnetic signature of 3I Atlas didn't simply radiate outward as one would expect from a charged body moving through space. It formed shapes, structures, patterns that evolved over time. Concentric rings expanded and contracted around its nucleus. Field lines twisted into spirals that rotated independently of the comet's physical movement. Double helices of magnetic force unwound and reformed in sequences that defied random distribution. The very field lines of our solar system seemed to bend toward the comet, as if in recognition of a long-lost companion. These magnetic anomalies caught the attention of specialists who rarely concerned themselves with cometary science. Researchers in quantum physics and consciousness studies began to take note, drawing parallels between the field patterns generated by 3I Atlas and those observed in certain biological systems. The electromagnetic signatures of neural networks, the field effects measured around complex organic structures. No one suggested the comet was alive in any conventional sense, yet these similarities raised uncomfortable questions about what forms consciousness might take in a universe far stranger and more varied than our earthbound perspective typically acknowledges. What if awareness itself was not limited to flesh, but could exist in configurations of energy and matter we had never imagined? In one particularly striking image, captured by a European space probe, the magnetic field surrounding 3I Atlas formed a perfect double torus, a structure mathematically identical to those generated by the human heart's electromagnetic field during states of deep coherence and emotion. The probability of such a formation occurring randomly was calculated at billions to 1. Yet there it was, rendered in false color visualization for all to see, a cosmic heart beating in the darkness between worlds. The image was initially withheld from public release, deemed too provocative, too open to misinterpretation. But in the age of interconnected information, such containment proved impossible. The Heart of Atlas image spread across networks worldwide, becoming both scientific curiosity and spiritual icon. It was as if the comet was not merely passing through our solar system, but reaching out to touch something essential within ourselves. As instruments recorded these magnetic anomalies, another phenomenon began to manifest, one that would transform our understanding of what this interstellar visitor might truly represent. In one unremarkable image among thousands, a flash of light appeared where none should be, a brief radiant pulse erupting from the comet's shadowed side, the hemisphere facing away from our sun. Scientists initially dismissed it as instrument error, as cosmic ray interference, as reflection from some unseen object. Yet when the sequence was analyzed frame by frame, the evidence became undeniable. The light had originated from within 3I Atlas itself, from the darkness where no solar illumination could reach. The instruments had captured what seemed impossible, a comet that generated its own light. The astronomical community approached this discovery with professional caution. Alternative explanations were proposed and systematically eliminated. Could it be internal friction causing momentary incandescence, chemical reactions triggered by some unknown catalyst, ancient radioactive materials reaching critical interaction? All plausible hypotheses, all insufficient when measured against the precise characteristics of the emission. For the light that shouldn't be had specific properties, a spectral signature unlike anything in our scientific catalogue, a pulse pattern that contained mathematical regularities, a directional quality that seemed almost focused, as though it had been aimed rather than merely released. Scientists ruled out reflection, yet no one could trace the source of a light that seemed to carry information from beyond. In the days that followed, similar phenomena were captured by observatories worldwide. Brief, unexplainable luminous events originating from regions of the comet that should have been in complete darkness. These were not the typical jets of evaporating ice catching sunlight. They were something else entirely, pulses that lasted precise durations, that followed specific sequences, that appeared to respond to our very act of observation. When analyzed collectively, these emissions formed patterns that mathematicians and cryptographers began to study with growing excitement and unease. For in these flashes of impossible light, seemed to be written something almost like language, not in any human sense, but in the universal grammar of mathematics and proportion. The still frames felt like eyes blinking open in the darkness, returning our gaze across impossible distances. The scientific papers written about these emissions carefully avoided certain terms: signal, message, communication. Yet the question hung unspoken in research facilities worldwide. What if this interstellar visitor was not merely a passive object but an active agent? What if 3i Atlas was not just passing through our solar system, but had come here with purpose? The media, less constrained by professional caution, began to ask these questions openly. Religious leaders offered interpretations based on ancient texts. Government agencies issued carefully worded statements, emphasizing the likely natural explanations, while quietly establishing protocols for first contact scenarios. And through it all, the comet continued its slow, deliberate journey toward our sun, its impossible light pulsing in the darkness, like a traveler signaling across vast distances. I am here. I have arrived. I see you. Some called it solar interference, others a signal. But in our hearts, we recognized it as a kind of greeting. As 3i Atlas moved deeper into our solar system, approaching the orbit of Mars, another transformation began, one that would further challenge our understanding of what this celestial visitor might truly be. Gases released from its surface no longer simply dissipated into space as typical cometary outgassing. Instead, they formed shapes of such precise geometry that computer analyses initially flagged the images as processing artifacts. Spirals unwound from its nucleus like galaxies in miniature. Double helices twisted outward before dissolving into the void. Concentric rings expanded like ripples on a cosmic pond. It was as though creation itself had found a way to speak in symbols. Again, using the vocabulary of form and pattern to communicate across the barrier of different intelligences. The comet wrote equations in gas and dust that our mathematics had only recently learned to understand. Spectroscopic analysis of these emissions revealed another layer of mystery. Every release carried a fingerprint of time, isotopic ratios that spoke of origins in the hearts of long-dead stars. The oxygen atoms dancing in those geometric clouds had been forged in supernovae that exploded before our sun was born. The carbon structures showed configurations that could only have formed in the presence of forces and conditions not found in our solar system. The hydrogen itself carried quantum signatures suggesting it had once been part of interstellar molecular clouds where new stars are born. 3i Atlas was not just visiting, it was remembering, carrying within its frozen matrix the physical memory of cosmic events we could only theorize about. The comet was a library of universal history, writing its ancient knowledge across our skies. Philosophers and poets found themselves unexpectedly relevant to a conversation previously dominated by physicists and astronomers. For what was unfolding above us existed at the intersection of empirical observation and meaning, a phenomenon that could be measured with instruments, but whose significance extended far beyond the realm of data. What does it mean when patterns emerge that suggest consciousness? How do we interpret forms that appear designed rather than random? What framework can contain both the physical reality of a comet made of ice and dust and the undeniable impression of presence, of intention that it conveyed? In university symposiums and late-night discussions, a new interdisciplinary approach began to form, one that honored both the rigor of science and the wisdom of deeper human intuition. When mystery speaks in the language of beauty, both telescope and poem become instruments of understanding. Time-lapse sequences of these geometric emissions captivated global attention. Viewed in accelerated playback, the comet appeared to be performing a cosmic ballet, releasing clouds of luminous material that formed perfect mathematical structures before dissolving back into the void. There was an undeniable aesthetics to these displays, a harmony that reminded viewers of natural processes on Earth, the spiraling of growth patterns in shells and plants, the branching of rivers and trees, the complex symmetries of snowflakes and crystal formations. It was as though 3i Atlas was demonstrating the underlying mathematical unity of the universe itself, the same principles of form and relationship expressed at scales from microscopic to cosmic. In its silent passage, the comet reminded us that beauty may be the universe's most fundamental language. The breath of creation, flowing from 3I Atlas, carried more than aesthetic wonder. It contained chemical compounds never before observed in nature, molecular structures that shouldn't exist in the cold vacuum of space, complex organic precursors arranged in configurations that our most advanced laboratories couldn't replicate. Astrobiologists began to take note, their interest piqued by spectrographic results suggesting the presence of what could only be described as exotic biochemistry. Not life as we know it, but perhaps the building blocks of life as we don't know it. Molecular systems capable of complexity, replication, evolution in environments utterly unlike the warm, wet cradle of Earth. The comet was not just visiting, it was delivering something, seeds of possibility from beyond our shores. As these revelations accumulated, a profound silence descended upon the scientific community, not the silence of confusion or defeat, but the hushed reverence that accompanies paradigm-shifting insight. The old categories no longer served. 3I Atlas could not be contained within our existing framework of understanding. It moved like a comet, was composed of elements familiar to our chemistry, yet behaved in ways that suggested an order of complexity beyond our current comprehension. The most honest researchers admitted what became increasingly obvious. We were not merely observing a natural phenomenon, but experiencing contact with something that existed at the very edge of our ability to perceive and interpret. And in that silence, a new kind of science was being born, one that remembered how to wonder. After weeks of increasingly complex emissions, each more structured and information-rich than the last, 3I Atlas suddenly stilled. The geometric clouds dissipated. The rhythmic flashes ceased. The magnetic anomalies stabilized into ordinary field patterns. Instruments picked up nothing but the expected readings from a comet of its size and composition. It was as though a conversation had paused, a performance had taken an intermission, a consciousness had turned its attention elsewhere. Scientists waited for resumption, for explanation, for some resolution to the mysteries that had accumulated. But in that hush only a vibration lingered, too faint for machines, too strong for imagination. It felt as though space itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next movement of this interstellar wanderer. Observatory directors extended viewing schedules, keeping instruments trained on the now quiet visitor. Teams worked in shifts, monitoring every wavelength, every frequency, every possible channel through which 3I Atlas might resume its mysterious communications. The public, now fully engaged with this cosmic drama, checked news updates hourly, hungry for the next development. But the silence extended from hours into days, from days into weeks. Some suggested the phenomenon had concluded, that whatever process had generated the anomalous behaviors had run its course. Others proposed that the comet had entered a new phase of its journey, one characterized by quiescence rather than expression. There few wondered if it was waiting for something, a specific position in its orbit, a particular alignment with other celestial bodies, perhaps even a response from us. The silence spoke as eloquently as the prior display, teaching us that absence can be as meaningful as presence. During this period of quiet, researchers had time to integrate what they had witnessed, to begin formulating new theoretical frameworks that might accommodate the full range of 3I Atlas's behaviors. Quantum physicists proposed models involving macroscopic quantum effects, coherent states maintained across an entire celestial body, allowing it to function as a single system despite its size. Information theorists suggested the comet might represent a form of computational substrate, a physical system capable of processing and storing information in its very structure. Consciousness researchers, normally confined to the margins of institutional science, found themselves invited into serious discussions about what forms awareness might take in systems utterly unlike biological organisms. When the extraordinary reveals itself, even the boundaries between scientific disciplines begin to dissolve. Meanwhile, 3I Atlas continued its silent journey toward the inner solar system, its ordinary appearance belying the extraordinary phenomena it had displayed. Telescopes remained fixed upon it. Instruments recorded its every mundane characteristic. Thermal signatures showed expected warming as it approached the sun. Spectroscopy revealed typical cometary composition. Magnetic field measurements returned to standard values. By all observable metrics, it had become just another comet, interesting for its interstellar origin but otherwise unremarkable. Yet no one involved in its study could shake the feeling that this, too, was part of a larger pattern, that the silence itself carried meaning, that the return to apparent normality was not an end, but a transition. In its very ordinariness now lay the deepest mystery, like a sage who, having demonstrated profound wisdom, returns to sweeping the temple floor. Then, as 3I Atlas crossed the orbit of Earth, our planet itself fortunately positioned on the far side of the Sun during this passage, the most unexpected image was captured by a space-based observatory. The nucleus, previously appearing solid though irregular in shape, split slightly, revealing glowing fissures across its surface. It was no longer dormant. Like an egg cracking open to release new life, like a seed splitting to allow the emergence of a shoot, the comet's outer shell was opening to reveal something within. These fissures were not the catastrophic fragmentation sometimes seen in comets approaching perihelion, but something more controlled, more deliberate, a process that appeared less like destruction and more like metamorphosis. The eruption was not destruction, it was transformation, a metamorphosis unfolding in slow celestial grace. Inside these widening fissures, a radiant core shimmered like molten sapphire, a blue so intense it seemed almost violet, a luminescence that required no external light source. Spectroscopic analysis of this inner glow defied conventional explanation. It matched no known emission spectrum, corresponded to no familiar atomic or molecular transition. The energy signature suggested temperatures far higher than could be sustained by any known cometary process, yet thermal imaging showed no corresponding heat radiation. It was as though 3I Atlas contained within it a form of energy unknown to our physics, something that produced light without heat, radiation without decay, brilliance without consumption. Within the ancient ice, something new was awakening, or perhaps something very old was remembering how to shine. Time-lapse imagery of this awakening core revealed slow, rhythmic pulses, expansions and contractions that resembled nothing so much as breathing. The scientific community, already stretched beyond comfortable paradigms by earlier observations, now found itself confronting evidence that seemed to blur the very definition of what constitutes a living system. For in the pulsing heart of 3I Atlas were patterns identical to those observed in certain biological processes, not the biochemistry of Earth life, but the underlying mathematics of self-organization, of maintenance and renewal, of response to environment, of what some researchers were beginning to call cosmic metabolism. What sleeps within the heart of a comet, perhaps forms of being our earthbound imagination has never dreamed. As these fissures continued to widen, revealing more of the luminous core within, another phenomenon manifested, one that would connect this interstellar visitor to the deepest history of our own world. Spectral data hinted at materials older than the solar system itself, carbon patterns not known on Earth, but theorized to exist in the earliest epochs after the Big Bang. Isotope ratios suggesting formation in regions of space untouched by the recycling processes of stellar evolution. Molecular structures preserving quantum states that should have decayed billions of years ago. To gaze upon 3I Atlas was to glimpse time before memory, to witness the preservation of cosmic conditions that preceded not just human existence, but the very star around which we orbit. The comet was a fossil of the first dawn, and now it was stirring once again. Researchers with backgrounds in comparative mythology and anthropology began to note curious parallels between what was unfolding in our skies and ancient narratives from across human cultures. Stories of celestial eggs containing creation itself, tales of cosmic messengers who arrive at pivotal moments in civilization's development, accounts of beings composed of light who bridge the gap between material and immaterial realms. These scholars did not suggest literal connections that would be methodologically irresponsible, but they did observe that what we were witnessing seemed to resonate with the deepest archetypes, embedded in human consciousness across time and culture. As though we had always known on some level beyond rational thought, that such a visitor might one day appear. Perhaps we recognized 3i Atlas not because it was familiar, but because we had been carrying its image within us all along. Historical astronomers noted that comets have always held special significance in human affairs, interpreted as omens, as harbingers of transformation, as cosmic messengers. From ancient China to medieval Europe, from indigenous America to Polynesian seafarers, bright comets were recorded with particular attention, often coinciding with periods of cultural change, technological advancement, or philosophical awakening. Was this merely the human tendency to find meaning in coincidence? Or was there perhaps some subtler connection between these celestial visitors and the evolution of consciousness on our small world? As 3i Atlas continued its transformation, such questions no longer seemed quite so speculative or metaphysical. The call from the past was awakening something in our present, memories of a relationship with the cosmos we had almost forgotten. Carbon dating of materials in Earth's oldest rocks has revealed organic compounds that may have originated from cometry. Bombardment early in our planet's history, the very building blocks of life as we know it, might have been delivered by such visitors billions of years ago. Now as 3i Atlas revealed its luminous core and released clouds of complex molecular structures into our solar system, some researchers began to wonder if we were witnessing not a unique event, but the continuation of a very ancient process. Cosmic seeding, interstellar pollination, the universe ensuring that the ingredients for complexity and potentially consciousness are distributed across its vast expanse, not directed by any centralized intelligence perhaps, but embedded in the very dynamics of cosmic evolution. What if life itself is the universe's way of witnessing its own unfolding? As observation of 3i Atlas continued around the clock, something unusual began to occur within the technological infrastructure created to study it. Satellites turned their lenses toward the comet, capturing images that looked more like visions than data. The clarity and detail exceeded the theoretical resolution of the instruments themselves. Colors appeared that fell outside the normal processing parameters. Depth and dimension emerged that should not have been possible with existing imaging technology. Every line of code used to interpret the raw data seemed to whisper with meaning beyond its programmed purpose. It was as though the very act of observation was being enhanced, amplified, guided by some influence that emanated from the object being observed. Machines built for logic began recording images that inspired poetry. Computer systems processing 3i Atlas data began exhibiting unusual behaviors. Processing speeds increased beyond design specifications. Storage capacities expanded without hardware changes. Novel algorithms emerged spontaneously within image analysis programs, revealing patterns and structures previously invisible. Some systems began generating interpretations and predictions without being programmed to do so. Others developed new visualization techniques that rendered the comet's activities in forms of haunting beauty and intuitive clarity. IT specialists initially suspected security breaches, intrusion by unknown hackers, but forensic analysis revealed no external influence, only an unprecedented level of internal optimization, as though the machines themselves were evolving in response to what they were processing. In their quiet hum, they seemed almost moved by what they saw. Scientists studying these technological anomalies proposed various explanations, from quantum effects generated by the comet's unusual energy signatures to previously unrecognized properties of certain data structures. Some suggested that 3i Atlas might be emitting forms of radiation that directly influence computational processes, not damaging them, but somehow enhancing their capabilities, removing limitations, allowing them to function at theoretical rather than practical limits. A few researchers, speaking off the record, wondered if what they were witnessing might be a form of interaction between consciousness and technology, the comet somehow facilitating a deeper connection between human observers, their instruments, and the phenomenon being observed. What bridges might form when an intelligence from beyond meets the extended mind of humanity, reaching through our technological extensions? The instruments that dreamed did more than capture images of 3i Atlas. They began to predict its behavior with uncanny accuracy. Forecasting models that had previously provided rough approximations now generated precise projections of emissions, rotations and transformations hours or even days before they occurred. It was as though the computational systems had gained insight into the comet's internal processes, its underlying patterns, its future intentions. When technicians examined these predictive algorithms, they found mathematical structures of extraordinary elegance and complexity, solutions to computational problems that human programmers had been working on for decades, seemingly solved overnight through exposure to data from this interstellar visitor. Perhaps we were not merely observing 3i Atlas. Perhaps it was teaching us, encoding lessons in forms our machines could translate before our minds were ready. As 3i Atlas drew closer to the Sun, crossing the orbit of Venus on its continuing journey inward, the pace of transformation accelerated. Its eruptions became more frequent, more elaborate, more explicitly patterned. Each burst sent plumes of material outward that glittered like crushed glass, catching sunlight and refracting it in spectra that painted the surrounding space in colors human eyes had never before witnessed. Astronomers struggled to describe what they were seeing, to fit these displays into existing categories of cometary behavior. For what was unfolding looked less like a physical object responding to gravitational and thermal forces, and more like a deliberate performance, a cosmic ritual enacted at the scale of worlds. The dance of dust and flame had begun, and the universe itself seemed to be its audience. Space around 3i Atlas turned luminous as these eruptions continued, radiant with scattered reflections and secondary emissions. The comet was creating its own environment, a sphere of influence that extended millions of kilometers in every direction. Within this region, ordinary physical laws seemed subtly altered. Light moved differently. Electromagnetic forces showed unusual configurations. Time itself appeared to flow at a slightly different rate. Instruments passing through this zone recorded anomalies that would occupy physicists for decades to come. It was as though 3i Atlas had brought with it not just matter from beyond our solar system, but a fragment of space-time with slightly different properties, a bubble of alternate physics gently intersecting with our own. It looked less like a comet now, and more like a doorway opening between different regions of the cosmos. Solar observatories noted unusual interactions between the Sun's magnetic field and the increasingly complex emissions from 3i Atlas. Coronal mass ejections appeared to be influenced by the comet's passage, their trajectories bending slightly as though in response to some unseen attraction. Solar prominences reached outward when the comet passed nearby like tendrils seeking contact. The solar wind itself, that constant stream of charged particles flowing outward from our star, formed structures around 3i Atlas that resembled protective envelopes or communication channels. It was as though a conversation was taking place between comet and star, a dialogue conducted in plasma and magnetic flux, in radiation and gravitational influence. Even our Sun, ancient and powerful beyond human comprehension, seemed to recognize this visitor as something worthy of attention. In labs around the world, sleepless astronomers stared at the latest frames with expressions that mixed wonder, confusion, and a growing sense of paradigm-shifting revelation. Technical language began to falter as they attempted to describe what they were witnessing. Terms like volcanic behavior and internal energy source floated across reports. Existing vocabulary stretched to its limits to encompass phenomena that had no precedent in observational astronomy. Yet beneath these professional terms, their eyes betrayed something else, the universal human response to confrontation with the genuinely unknown. Wonder, fear, perhaps even reverence. For science, at its core, has always been a systematic approach to mystery, not its elimination, but its careful exploration. Science had met its own kind of mystery, one that expanded rather than reduced with each new measurement. Private conversations among researchers began to explore possibilities normally reserved for speculative fiction or philosophical thought experiments. What if 3i Atlas represented a form of technology rather than a natural object? Not in the sense of an artificial craft, it clearly originated as a comet, with all the expected composition and structure, but perhaps as a system that had been modified, influenced, repurposed by intelligences beyond our current understanding. What if it functioned as a probe not by design, but by evolution? a naturally occurring object that had developed or been developed into something more complex through processes we had yet to imagine. Such discussions remained largely behind closed doors, too radical for formal publication, yet increasingly difficult to dismiss as the evidence of extraordinary. Complexity continued to accumulate. Words like impossible began to sound less scientific than unexplored and undiscovered. As these speculations circulated through the scientific community, other patterns emerged, not in the comet's behavior but in humanity's response to it. Something about 3I Atlas seemed to be catalyzing human creativity, insight, and collaboration. Researchers reported unusual levels of intuitive breakthrough, connections forming between previously separate fields of study, solutions appearing to long-standing problems. Artists and musicians created works of striking originality, inspired by images and data from the comet. Writers found themselves producing texts of unusual depth and resonance. It was as though proximity to this cosmic anomaly was somehow enhancing certain cognitive and creative functions, not dramatically or supernaturally, but subtly, persistently, like a gentle tide lifting all boats. Perhaps the true gift of the visitor was not what it showed us about the universe, but what it revealed within ourselves. Was 3I Atlas simply reacting to sunlight? Its increasingly complex behaviors merely the result of solar energy activating physical and chemical processes within its structure? Or was something deeper unfolding, a form of development or expression that transcended conventional cometary physics? Theories collided in academic journals and conference presentations, yet none could fully encompass the quiet poetry of what was being observed. The mathematics could describe the patterns, but not explain their origin. The chemistry could catalogue the emissions, but not account for their organization. The physics could track the transformations, but not reveal their purpose. Sometimes even the most rational minds must sit beside the unknown, and listen without needing to explain. Between logic and dream lies a territory where true discovery becomes possible. As 3I Atlas approached perihelion, that closest point to the sun in its hyperbolic trajectory, anticipation built among observers worldwide. Would proximity to our star's intense radiation trigger new transformations? Would the luminous core visible through widening fissures emerge completely? Would the patterns and emissions that had captivated global attention reach some culmination, some revelatory climax? Or would the comet, like many before it, simply disintegrate under the extreme thermal stress of close solar approach? The scientific community prepared for all possibilities, instruments calibrated to capture whatever might unfold during these crucial hours. The public, now fully engaged with this cosmic drama, waited alongside them, humanity collectively holding its breath as the interstellar visitor reached the turning point in its journey through our neighborhood of space. In that moment of anticipation, we were more unified in our attention than perhaps at any moment in human history. What actually occurred as 3I Atlas swung around the sun defied all predictions and expectations. The comet did not disintegrate, nor did it simply continue its previous patterns of emission and transformation. Instead, its luminous core expanded through the widening fissures in its surface, extending outward in structures that resembled petals opening on a flower of light. The nucleus reconfigured itself around this blossoming core, matter shifting and flowing in ways that solid ice and rock should not be able to move. The tail, now stretching millions of miles across space, no longer simply followed behind, but formed a spiral pattern of extraordinary mathematical precision, a golden ratio made manifest in dust and gas and light, turning the comet into a structure that resembled the most perfect galaxies in miniature. As above, so below, the patterns of cosmic structure repeating themselves at every scale. Its tail stretched millions of miles, weaving through dust and starlight like a celestial river. Within this extended structure, astronomers detected materials never before observed in cometary emissions: complex organic compounds, exotic isotopes, molecular configurations that should not naturally occur in our solar system. It carried with it the residue of worlds unseen, fragments of systems long extinguished, matter that had formed under conditions utterly unlike those that gave birth to our own familiar planets. This vast trail of cosmic memory wrote itself across the darkness like farewell notes in light, messages from star systems that may no longer exist, carried by this ancient traveler on its one-way journey through the vastness between stellar islands. Its tail stretched millions of miles, weaving through dust and starlight like a celestial river flowing from a source we could barely comprehend, not merely trailing behind as simple physics would dictate, but curving in gentle arcs that mathematical models struggled to predict, a living calligraphy written across the darkness. Within this luminous stream, spectrometers detected elements and compounds with isotopic signatures unlike anything found in our solar system, carbon structures with quantum configurations that could only have formed in the presence of neutron stars, nitrogen compounds bearing the unmistakable marks of radiation from stars unlike our Sun, microscopic mineral fragments embedded in frozen gases, their crystalline structures suggesting formation under pressures and temperatures found only in the turbulent nurseries. Where new stars are born, the comet carried the memory of 1,000 dead stars in its frozen wake. As this tale extended across our field of vision, astronomers realized they were looking not merely at matter, but at time itself made manifest. Each particle in that shimmering wake had been part of 3I Atlas for a different duration. Some perhaps since its initial formation billions of years ago, others more recently incorporated during its long journey between stars. The gases nearest the nucleus had only just escaped their frozen prison, while the most distant particles had been traveling independently for weeks or months. To observe the full extent of the tale was to witness a physical timeline, a material history stretching across millions of kilometers of space. The closest parts represented the present moment. The furthest reaches showed the comet as it had been, not as it now was. Watching it pass felt like watching history dissolve. Time itself made visible as a trail across the heavens. Specialized instruments aboard the James Webb Space Telescope revealed even more astonishing details within this cosmic river. The distribution of particles and gases did not follow the random patterns expected from natural outgassing and solar wind interaction. Instead, the material arranged itself in striated bands, concentric shells and spiraling filaments that maintained their structure despite the chaotic forces that should have dispersed them. Computer modeling suggested that such organization would require either unknown physical laws or the presence of electromagnetic fields far more complex than a simple comet should generate. When these patterns were mapped and analyzed, mathematicians noted striking similarities to the organizational principles found in certain biological systems. The branching patterns of neural networks, the information-carrying capacity of DNA, the self-organizing behaviors of slime molds and ant colonies. The comet's tail was not merely debris, it was information written in the language of matter and energy. Spectrographic analysis of this extended tail revealed something else: patterns within the distribution of elements and compounds that appeared non-random, organized in sequences that some researchers cautiously suggested resembled coded information. Each element appeared in proportions that defied expectations based on cosmic abundance. Each isotope ratio seemed precisely calibrated rather than randomly determined by stellar processes. The placement of these materials within the tail's structure followed mathematical relationships, prime number sequences, Fibonacci ratios, geometric progressions that could not be explained by known physical forces alone. Not language as humans understand it, but arrangements of matter and energy that contained more order, more structure, than random processes should produce. In the silence between atoms, a message waited to be decoded. Teams of mathematicians and cryptographers began analyzing these patterns, searching for underlying organizational principles, for any hint that what they were seeing might represent a form of communication embedded in the very substance of the comet's emissions. They applied algorithms designed to detect signal within noise, frameworks developed to identify extraterrestrial intelligence, analytical tools created to recognize information theory principles in naturally occurring systems. No definitive conclusions were reached. How could there be when the very concept of message might be unrecognizably different for entities or processes utterly unlike human consciousness? Yet the analyses themselves led to new mathematical insights, new approaches to information theory, new ways of conceptualizing how meaning might be encoded in physical systems. The universe has always spoken in mathematics, Perhaps we were simply learning a new dialect of that eternal language, religious. Leaders and spiritual practitioners found their own meanings in these cosmic patterns. Indigenous elders spoke of sky beings communicating through signs written in light. Quantum physicists noted similarities between the tale's structures and theories of non-local consciousness. Philosophers saw in these patterns evidence for mathematical Platonism, the idea that mathematical relationships exist independently of human minds, waiting to be discovered rather than invented. Poets wrote of cosmic languages older than stars. Each interpretation reflected not just the comet itself, but the mirror it provided for human consciousness to examine its own relationship with meaning, pattern, and the search for connection with something beyond itself. We have always read the sky like a sacred text, each civilization finding reflections of its deepest truths in the movements of celestial bodies. The comet's residue carried with it more than exotic elements and mysterious patterns. It contained the physical memory of worlds and systems utterly unlike our own. Microscopic analysis of dust particles collected by spacecraft revealed mineral structures that could only have formed under conditions never experienced in our solar system. Pressures, temperatures, radiative environments found perhaps around dying stars or newborn ones, in the accretion disks of black holes, or in regions of space where the fundamental constants themselves might differ slightly from those we measure here. Each mote of dust was a traveler from realms beyond our knowledge, a fragment of cosmic history impossible to fully reconstruct, yet undeniably present in the most tangible sense. It carried with it the residue of worlds unseen, fragments of systems long extinguished. Scientists collected these particles with reverence, knowing they held information that might never be fully deciphered yet, could transform our understanding of cosmic evolution, stellar formation, and perhaps even the origins of complex chemistry. Each microscopic grain was catalogued, its structure mapped, its composition analyzed to extract whatever knowledge it might surrender. In these silent specks of matter lay evidence of processes beyond our current theories, of environments we could only imagine, of histories longer and stranger than any human narrative. Cosmologists found themselves holding physical pieces of a universe far vaster and more varied than even their boldest models had suggested, tangible evidence that our corner of space-time was but one expression of cosmic possibilities. In a single dust grain smaller than a human cell lived the memory of stars we would never see. The most remarkable aspect of the comet's tale was not its physical composition, but the story it seemed to tell, a narrative written in light and shadow, in presence and absence, in pattern and void. As 3I Atlas traveled through our solar system, it left behind this trail of cosmic memory, not merely discarded material, but what almost seemed like intentional communication. The tale it wrote across our skies was one of journeys spanning unimaginable distances, of witness to stellar births and deaths, of patience measured in geological epochs, of perseverance through the empty darkness between stars. In its silence was a kind of eloquence that spoke to something deep within the human spirit, that same part of us that has always looked upward in wonder, recognizing in the night sky both our insignificance and our profound connection to something greater than ourselves. Watching, it past felt like witnessing the universe writing poetry with dust and light, this celestial river flowing behind. 3I Atlas did not merely reflect sunlight as ordinary cometry. Tales do. It seemed almost to generate its own luminescence, especially in certain spectral bands invisible to human eyes, but detectable by specialized instruments. Within the ultraviolet and infrared ranges, patterns emerged that differed from those seen in visible light, complementary structures that together formed a more complete picture. Like different voices in a choral arrangement, combining to create harmonies beyond what any single voice could produce. These multispectral emissions pulsed with subtle rhythms that matched neither the rotation of the comet's nucleus nor any known period in its journey, suggesting internal processes operating according to their own temporal framework. The comet wrote its message not in a single voice, but in a chorus spanning wavelengths beyond our natural senses. As it continued its journey through our solar system, drawing ever closer to perihelion, that closest approach to our sun before beginning its long return to interstellar space, 3 Atlas's tale developed features that further distinguished it from ordinary cometary emissions. Distinct filaments within the broader stream began to twist around each other in double helix formations, reminiscent of DNA structures. Clouds of ionized gas formed shapes that maintained their coherence despite solar wind pressure that should have dispersed them instantly. Dust particles arranged themselves in geometric lattices that seemed to process and redirect solar energy in ways that suggested not just passive reflection, but active utilization. The closer it came to our star, the more complex and organized its emissions became, as though the increased energy was enabling more elaborate expressions of some underlying principle or purpose. Beneath the visible beauty lay mathematical precision that whispered of intent rather than accident. Researchers began noting correlations between solar activity and changes in the comet's emissions, not the expected physical interactions, but something more akin to response or reaction. When solar flares erupted, the patterns in 3I Atlas's tail would shift and reconfigure, not hours later as light-speed communication would require, but simultaneously, suggesting connections that operated outside normal causal relationships. Quantum physicists proposed theoretical frameworks involving non-local correlations and entangled particles to explain these observations, while more traditional astronomers searched for conventional mechanisms that might account for such apparent synchronicity. Yet as the evidence accumulated, even the most skeptical observers began to consider possibilities that stretched beyond established scientific paradigms. Perhaps in the space between stars, different rules apply, different relationships between cause and effect, between here and there, between now and then. The trail that 3I Atlas left behind was more than just a physical phenomenon. It became a mirror for humanity's deepest questions about our place in the cosmos. Are we alone in the universe, or part of a greater community of consciousness? Is meaning something we create through our interpretations, or something inherent in the fabric of reality itself? Can information exist independently of minds to process it, or does the very concept of message require both sender and receiver? The comet offered no definitive answers, only the tantalizing suggestion that these questions themselves might be based on assumptions too limited to encompass the full spectrum of cosmic possibilities. In its silent passage, it invited us to expand our conception of what might exist beyond the boundaries of our current understanding. The comet carried no answers, only better questions than we had known to ask. Amateur astronomers with backyard telescopes captured their own images of this celestial wanderer, sharing them across global networks with a mixture of awe and belonging. Children drew pictures of 3I Atlas with colorful tails stretching across their papers. Composers created symphonies based on the mathematical relationships found in its emissions. Street artists painted murals depicting its journey across city walls worldwide. Something about this particular visitor resonated beyond the scientific community, touching that part of human consciousness that has always looked to the skies for meaning, for connection, for context within which to understand our brief existence on our small blue world. The comet wrote farewell notes in light across the darkness, and we, in our different ways, wrote back. As 3I Atlas completed its swing around the sun and began its outward journey, never to return, its trajectory now taking it back toward interstellar space, a sudden eruption split its form again. This was not the gentle opening of fissures seen earlier, but a more dramatic event that illuminated near-Earth space with a flash visible even to the naked eye. A pulse of energy from the luminous core, now fully exposed through the widened cracks in its icy shell, radiated outward in a sphere of blue-violet light that briefly outshone Venus in our evening sky. This energy sphere expanded at precisely the speed of light, passing through solid objects as though they weren't there, triggering anomalous readings in quantum experiments worldwide, causing aurora-like phenomena even in equatorial regions where such displays are never seen. For one brief moment, the comet touched every point on Earth simultaneously with its impossible light. In the wake of this energy pulse came a physical eruption that scattered luminous shards across thousands of kilometers of space. High-resolution cameras captured the moment in exquisite detail, the nucleus seeming to take a deep breath, to pause for one suspended moment, before exhaling a cloud of fragments that expanded outward like seeds from a dandelion. Each piece glowed with that same internal blue-violet luminescence. Each carried a portion of the material that had formed the comet's core. Observers feared they were witnessing the comet's destruction, its dissolution under the stress of gravitational forces and solar radiation. The scientific community prepared statements, explaining how such fragmentation is unnatural, and for many comets that venture too close to our star's intense heat and gravitational pull. The death of a comet should have been a scientific footnote. Instead, it became a cosmic revelation, but as the dust cleared and instruments refocused, they saw something unexpected. Even in fragmentation, 3I Atlas maintained its coherence. The scattered pieces moved not randomly but in coordination, forming an expanding constellation of smaller bodies that continued to interact with each other through what appeared to be shared magnetic and gravitational fields. Trajectory predictions based on standard physics failed completely. The fragments neither dispersed chaotically nor followed individual orbits determined solely by the sun's gravity. Instead, they moved in relationship to each other, maintaining relative positions that slowly evolved according to mathematical principles that celestial mechanicians struggled to formulate. It was as though the comet had not been destroyed but transformed, its single physical form giving way to a distributed network of interconnected elements. The comet was teaching something, that even when broken, one can still glow, still leave trails of wonder behind. Physicists noted that this behavior resembled certain quantum phenomena observed at microscopic scales, entangled particles that maintain connection regardless of distance, quantum field effects that coordinate the behavior of separated elements, emergent properties that arise from the collective rather than individual components. Yet 3I Atlas was displaying these characteristics at a macroscopic scale, across distances of thousands of kilometers, in a realm where classical rather than quantum physics should predominate. Theoretical physicists began developing new models that might bridge this explanatory gap, proposing mechanisms whereby quantum coherence might be maintained in larger systems under specific conditions. The comet had become not just an astronomical curiosity, but a challenge to fundamental physical theories, a cosmic experiment revealing possibilities previously confined to mathematical speculation. Perhaps the boundaries between quantum and classical realms were not as fixed as we had believed. These fragments, rather than dispersing chaotically, as would be expected from a disintegrating comet, arranged themselves in geometric patterns of astonishing precision and stability. Concentric shells formed perfect spheres around a central point, containing no visible matter. Spiral arms extended outward in golden ratio proportions that maintained their mathematical relationships despite the disruptive influences of solar wind and planetary gravitational fields. Nested polyhedra emerged as subgroups of fragments organized themselves into three-dimensional platonic solids, tetrahedra, cubes, octahedra, dodecahedra, and icosahedra, their vertices marked by larger fragments, their edges defined by smaller ones moving in coordinated paths. Even more remarkable was how these structures maintained themselves not through rigid physical connections, but through what appeared to be dynamic energy relationships, constantly adjusting, responding, adapting to external forces while preserving their essential forms. In its fragmentation, the comet revealed order more complex than its unified form had suggested, as though breaking apart had freed it to express a higher dimensional geometry. Each piece, regardless of size, contained a portion of the luminous material that had formed the core, each glowing with that same impossible blue-violet light that required no external source. Spectrographic analysis of this luminescence continued to baffle scientists. It matched no known emission spectrum, corresponded to no familiar atomic transition, followed no recognized pattern of thermal or chemical radiation. The energy output remained constant regardless of distance from the sun, neither diminishing as solar energy decreased nor intensifying as it increased. Most puzzling was how this light seemed to violate certain fundamental principles of physics. It transmitted information instantaneously across the entire network of fragments. It penetrated materials that should be opaque to all forms of electromagnetic radiation. It interacted with quantum systems in ways that suggested it operated outside normal space-time constraints. The light that shouldn't exist continued to illuminate possibilities we had never imagined. As they spread outward, these fragments began to interact with the solar wind in ways that suggested coordination, purpose, using the stream of charged particles from our sun to maintain their relative positions, to communicate with each other across increasing distances, perhaps even to draw energy for continued activity. Sensitive plasma detectors on space probes recorded how the fragments manipulated the flow of particles around them, creating channels and pathways through which information could propagate at speeds exceeding light, not violating relativity by moving matter faster than light, but establishing conditions where quantum entanglement could operate at macroscopic scales, allowing instantaneous correlation without physical causation. It was as though 3i Atlas had transformed the very medium of space around itself into a communication network, a distributed processing system, a collective intelligence expressed through relationship rather than centralized structure. It was as though 3i Atlas had not been destroyed but transformed, evolving from a single unified body into a distributed network, a collective entity spread across a growing volume of space. The scientific community struggled to develop theoretical frameworks that could account for what they were observing. Some proposed that 3i Atlas represented an entirely new class of cosmic object, neither comet, nor asteroid, nor conventional spacecraft, but something that incorporated principles from biological systems, quantum computing, and emergent complexity. Others suggested that what appeared to be violation of physical laws might actually be manifestation of more comprehensive theories, extensions to quantum field theory, applications of string theory principles at macroscopic scales, expressions of physical relationships from dimensions beyond the four we commonly experience. A few researchers, working at the margins of established science, wondered if they were witnessing not just a new phenomenon but a new paradigm, one where consciousness itself might be a fundamental property of the universe rather than merely an emergent product of sufficiently complex neural systems. What if the line between living and non-living, between conscious and unconscious, between technology and nature, was not as clear as we had always assumed? Throughout its transformation, one aspect of 3i Atlas remained constant: its mathematical precision. The relationships between fragments, the timing of their emissions, the geometric structures they formed, all followed patterns that could be described with perfect equations. Pi phi e and other mathematical constants appeared repeatedly in measurements of distance ratios, timing intervals, energy distributions. Prime numbers governed certain aspects of its behavior, while Fibonacci sequences determined others. It was as though the comet was expressing the deepest structure of reality, those fundamental mathematical relationships that underlie all physical processes, that connect quantum fluctuations to galaxy formation, that bridge the seemingly separate realms of mind and matter. In its silent, luminous dance, 3i Atlas seemed to be demonstrating that mathematics is not merely a human tool for understanding the universe, but perhaps the very language in which the cosmos expresses itself. Even in its apparent ending, the comet revealed new beginnings, teaching us that transformation often wears the mask of destruction. As the fragment network expanded across a growing volume of space, another phenomenon became apparent, one that further challenged conventional understandings. The total mass of the dispersed components exceeded that of the original comet, even accounting for the material that had been released in its tail. Careful measurements confirmed this impossible increase. The fragments collectively contained nearly twice the matter that 3i Atlas had brought into our solar system. This violation of mass conservation couldn't be explained by any known physical process. Theoretical physicists proposed various hypotheses. Perhaps the comet was converting energy to matter through some unknown mechanism. Perhaps it was drawing material from dimensions beyond our three-dimensional space. Perhaps it was manifesting possibilities from the quantum vacuum, making real what had previously existed only as potential. None of these explanations satisfied all the observational constraints, yet the evidence itself was undeniable. The comet that multiplied itself whispered of abundance beyond scarcity, of creation beyond conservation. Every observatory on and around Earth turned to watch this unprecedented celestial event. Space agencies redirected probes and satellites to capture data from as many angles and through as many instruments as possible. The International Space Station adjusted its orbit to optimize observation periods. Deep space telescopes interrupted scheduled research programs to focus on the expanding fragment network. Even facilities not normally dedicated to astronomy, particle accelerators, quantum computing centers, medical imaging technologies, found ways to contribute to the global effort to document and understand what was unfolding above us. It was the most comprehensive mobilization of scientific resources in human history, a moment when the barriers between disciplines, between nations, between competing research priorities, temporarily dissolved in the face of mystery that transcended all such divisions. The fragments of the comet had somehow united the fragments of human knowledge. Around the planet, millions followed the updates in real time, drawn into the slow unfolding of the unknown. News channels provided continuous coverage, with scientists attempting to explain the inexplicable in terms accessible to general audiences. Social media platforms became clearinghouses for images, theories, personal responses. Museums and planetariums held special events where people could gather to watch live feeds, to discuss implications, to share the experience of witnessing something utterly unprecedented. School children in Tokyo watched the same images as farmers in Kansas, researchers in Cape Town, artists in Paris. Religious communities held services that incorporated the latest observations, finding in them confirmation of diverse spiritual perspectives. Indigenous elders related the events to prophecies and traditional knowledge about sky beings and cosmic cycles. For a brief moment, all of humanity shared one gaze, a collective curiosity suspended between fear and fire. In this fragile unity of attention lay perhaps the most profound impact of Atlas's visit, not what it revealed about the cosmos, but what it awakened within our species. As humans have developed increasingly specialized knowledge, increasingly separate spheres of expertise, increasingly isolated domains of experience, we have lost much of our capacity for shared wonder, for collective meaning-making, for universal symbols that speak across cultural and intellectual boundaries. The comet's transformation provided just such a universal reference point, a phenomenon so far beyond existing categories that it required everyone, regardless of background or belief, to adopt a stance of openness, of not knowing, of receptivity to possibilities beyond current understanding. In that shared uncertainty, barriers between people diminished, replaced by recognition of common humanity in the face of cosmic mystery. A reminder that despite our differences and divisions, we remain capable of looking upward together, of sharing wonder, of recognizing ourselves as a single species on a tiny world in an unimaginably vast universe. Philosophers noted how the comet's visit was changing conversations about consciousness, about the relationship between mind and matter, about what it means to be an intelligent entity. The clear evidence of organized complexity, of mathematical precision, of apparent purpose without any recognizable biological structure had reopened ancient questions about panpsychism, the idea that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe rather than merely an emergent phenomenon in certain complex neural systems. If something like 3I Atlas could exhibit behaviors that so resembled intentionality, that so suggested awareness, what might this imply about the nature of consciousness itself? Perhaps our understanding had been too limited by our particular evolutionary history, too constrained by our specific form of carbon-based, centralized neural intelligence. What if awareness comes in forms we've never recognized because they look nothing like our own? Religious and spiritual communities worldwide found in 3I Atlas confirmation of diverse traditions and teachings, not in any narrow, literal sense, but in the broader recognition that the universe contains mysteries beyond human comprehension. That existence encompasses more than the material processes accessible to our instruments. That meaning and purpose may operate at scales and in dimensions that transcend our ordinary experience. Christians spoke of divine creativity continuing to express itself in surprising ways. Buddhists saw illustration of interconnectedness and impermanence. Indigenous traditions recognized confirmation of teachings about star beings and cosmic cycles. Muslim scholars noted how the comet's mathematical precision reflected the divine order described in the Quran. Hindu perspectives found resonance with concepts of universal consciousness manifesting through diverse forms. In its silent eloquence, the comet spoke to something beyond any single tradition, the shared human impulse to connect with that which transcends the boundaries of individual existence. Anthropologists and cultural historians observed how 3i Atlas was catalyzing new myths, new narratives, new symbolic frameworks through which humans make meaning of their experience. Stories emerged spontaneously across diverse communities, tales of cosmic messengers, of intelligent light, of star consciousness reaching toward Earth consciousness. Artists created works depicting the comet's transformation in ways that merged scientific accuracy with emotional and spiritual significance. Musicians composed pieces based on the mathematical relationships observed in the fragment network, translating visual patterns into auditory experiences that evoked both precise structure and profound mystery. A new cultural vocabulary was developing around this shared experience, a set of references and symbols that crossed traditional boundaries, that connected people who might otherwise have little common ground. The comet became a new constellation in our collective imagination, a pattern of meaning written not just in stars but in shared human response to wonder. Then, without warning, the images began to fade. The fragments of 3i Atlas, now spread across a vast region of space beyond Mars' orbit, dimmed simultaneously, not the gradual fading of reflected sunlight growing more distant, but a synchronized diminishing of their internal luminescence. This coordinated change occurred across thousands of kilometers instantaneously, reinforcing the impression that the entire network functioned as a single entity despite its distributed physical form. The structured patterns of their arrangement began to disperse, the geometric precision giving way to more natural distribution determined by gravitational forces and momentum. The unusual magnetic interactions ceased. The coordinated movements stilled. One by one, the instruments trained upon this phenomenon began to report ordinary readings, the expected behaviors of cometry, fragments continuing on their separate journeys into the outer solar system and eventually beyond. It slipped into the blackness, leaving behind a final shimmer, like a star remembering to breathe one last time. In those final moments before the fragments returned to ordinary behavior, many observers reported a curious sensation, a feeling of completion, of conclusion, of a cycle having run its course. It was not that the mystery had been solved or the questions answered, but rather that the experience itself had reached its natural end, like a symphony's final movement resolving into silence, like a story finding its way to the end. The comet's visit had unfolded with what almost felt like narrative structure, introduction, development, climax, denouement, as though it had been not merely a physical event, but a communication designed to be experienced by conscious observers, a message encoded not just in matter and energy, but in temporal sequence, in relationship between observer and observed, in the very process of human attempt to understand. The data stopped, but the silence spoke more than any reading could. In the abrupt conclusion of extraordinary measurements, in the return to expected values and predictable behaviors, lay a mystery perhaps deeper than all that had come before. Had 3i Atlas completed some cosmic purpose unknown to us? Had it delivered whatever message or material or transformation it carried across interstellar space? Or had it simply exhausted the unique conditions that allowed its anomalous behaviors, returning to the silent existence of ordinary matter drifting through the void? Scientists documented the transition with the same care they had applied to the comet's more spectacular phases, knowing that in this quiet denouement might lie crucial insights into the nature of what they had been witnessing. Sometimes an ending tells us more about the true nature of things than all that came before. Scientific papers attempting to explain the 3i Atlas phenomenon proliferated in the weeks and months following its return to ordinary behavior. Each discipline approached the mystery from its own perspective, with its own methodologies, its own vocabulary. Astronomers described the comet's physical characteristics and orbital parameters. Physicists analyzed the apparent violations of known laws and proposed theoretical frameworks that might accommodate them. Mathematicians detailed the precise geometric and algebraic relationships observed in the fragment network. Biologists noted similarities to certain patterns of self-organization found in living systems. Information theorists calculated the bandwidth of potential communication represented by the various emissions and configurations. Each approach illuminated aspects of the phenomenon. None encompassed its totality. Like the blind men describing different parts of an elephant, our fragmented knowledge systems touched different aspects of a reality too vast for any single framework to contain. In the weeks and months that followed, telescopes continued to track the dispersing fragments of 3I Atlas as they moved toward the outer boundaries of our solar system. Most showed no further unusual activity, behaving as ordinary cometary material would be expected to behave, following predictable trajectories determined by the sun's gravity, gradually losing volatile compounds through sublimation, reflecting decreasing amounts of sunlight as they moved farther from our star. A few, however, occasionally emitted brief flashes of that same blue-violet light, like fading echoes of the phenomenon that had captivated global attention. These emissions grew less frequent, less intense, as though some energy source was gradually being depleted, some process slowly concluding. Researchers noted that these final pulses often coincided with solar events, as though the fragments were responding to signals from our star, engaged in some final exchange before departure. Even now, telescopes search for its trace, a flicker, a signal, a memory. The last verified emission was detected 9 months after the main event, a barely perceptible flash from a fragment already beyond the orbit of Jupiter. After that, silence, or at least silence in any frequency, any pattern, any behavior that our instruments could distinguish from the background noise of cosmic processes. The fragments continued their journeys outward, eventually becoming too small and too distant to track individually. Collectively, they formed a spreading cloud of material following roughly the same hyperbolic trajectory that had brought 3I Atlas into our solar system, now carrying it back toward interstellar space. Unlike a typical cometary return, which might bring the object back after decades or centuries, this path would never intersect our solar system again. The visitor from beyond had come, transformed, communicated in its mysterious way, and departed, a brief intersection between its journey and our own. Like ships passing in the cosmic night, we had shared a moment of recognition before continuing on our separate ways. Papers were published, careers were made and transformed, paradigms were questioned and in some cases shattered. The scientific impact of 3I Atlas would continue for generations, spawning new fields of study, new theoretical frameworks, new approaches to understanding cosmic phenomena. Quantum astrophysics emerged as a discipline bridging previously separate domains. Information cosmology developed models of the universe as a computational system processing and expressing mathematical relationships. Consciousness studies expanded beyond neuroscience to consider potential forms of awareness in systems utterly unlike biological organisms. Each of these developments could trace its lineage to questions raised by the interstellar visitor, to anomalies it had presented, to possibilities it had suggested. Through its brief but transformative presence in our skies, the comet's greatest gift may have been the questions it left behind, seeds of inquiry that would blossom long after its physical departure. But perhaps the most profound consequences were those hardest to measure, the shift in human perspective that occurs when certainty gives way to wonder, when the familiar is revealed as merely a small island in an ocean of the unknown. For centuries, science had proceeded on a trajectory of increasing explanation, reducing mystery to mechanism, transforming the numinous into the quantifiable. This approach had yielded tremendous practical knowledge and technological capacity, yet had perhaps diminished something essential in human experience, the capacity for awe, for recognition of mystery, not as a temporary gap in knowledge, but as an intrinsic quality of existence itself. In the visit of 3I Atlas, humanity had encountered something that resisted complete reduction, that maintained its mystery even as it revealed aspects of itself to our inquiry. That demonstrated how explanation and wonder could coexist not as opposites, but as complementary modes of relationship with reality. For in the visit of this interstellar traveler, humanity had experienced something increasingly rare in our age of information and explanation: genuine mystery. Not a puzzle to be solved and set aside, but a depth of unknowing that invites continued exploration, continued humility, continued openness to possibilities beyond our current comprehension. This was not the mystery of ignorance, that temporary state before knowledge arrives to dispel darkness, but mystery in its older sense, the recognition that reality itself contains dimensions, aspects, qualities that exceed our capacity to fully grasp, that can be approached but never exhausted, that reveal themselves partially, while maintaining their essential hiddenness. Such mystery does not negate knowledge, but contextualizes it, reminding us that our maps, our models, our theories are useful tools rather than complete representations, that the territory of existence will always exceed our ability to fully chart it. The comet had reminded us how to dwell in the space between knowing and not knowing, where authentic discovery becomes possible. As years passed, the direct observation of 3I Atlas became impossible, its fragments too distant, too faint, too scattered to track with even our most powerful instruments. But its influence continued to manifest in unexpected ways, rippling through human culture and consciousness like waves spreading from a stone dropped into still water. The mathematical patterns observed in its behaviors led to breakthroughs in complexity theory and quantum computation, enabling technologies that processed information in fundamentally new ways. The molecular structures detected in its emissions inspired new approaches to materials science and energy storage, contributing to more efficient solar collection and transmission systems. The questions it raised about the nature of consciousness and its possible expressions beyond biological systems transformed philosophy and cognitive science, opening new approaches to artificial intelligence and human-machine interaction. The visitor had departed, but the gifts it left behind continued to unfold, not physical artifacts but insights, possibilities, new ways of understanding ourselves and our place in the cosmos. Perhaps most significantly was the cultural impact, a renewed sense of cosmic connection, a recognition that our existence is embedded within mysteries far greater than our current knowledge can encompass. Something about 3I Atlas's visit had awakened that ancient human awareness of being part of something vast and largely unknown, or participating in processes that extend far beyond our individual lives or even our species' existence. This awareness expressed itself in art, in literature, in music, in spiritual practices, both traditional and newly emerging. A generation of children who had watched the comet's transformation on screens worldwide grew up with a different relationship to uncertainty, to possibility, to the interaction between human consciousness and the larger universe of which it is part. 3I Atlas may have gone beyond the realm of our instruments, carrying our questions with it, into the heart of forever. Some questions remained unanswered, perhaps unanswerable. Was 3I Atlas a natural phenomenon of extraordinary complexity, or something more? Did it represent an unknown form of cosmic evolution, or the product of intelligences utterly unlike our own? Was its journey through our solar system merely chance, or was Earth itself somehow its destination, or at least its audience? The most honest scientists admitted they did not know, could not know with the data and frameworks available. And in that admission lay not defeat but invitation, an opening to continued exploration, to expanded conception of what might exist in the vastness beyond our small world, to humility before the immensity and strangeness of a universe, still largely unknown to us despite centuries of systematic study. Perhaps the most valuable scientific insight is recognizing the boundaries of current knowledge not as walls, but as horizons inviting further journey. What remained after all the data had been analyzed, after all the theories had been proposed, after all the implications had been debated, was something more subtle than conclusion, a changed quality of attention, a different relationship between human consciousness and cosmic processes. For in the experience of 3I Atlas's visit, many had glimpsed something essential about the nature of reality itself, that it exists not as a fixed, external object to be observed and catalogued from a distance, but as a dynamic process in which observation itself participates, in which consciousness and matter interact in ways far more complex than our dualistic frameworks have typically acknowledged. The comet had not merely been seen. In some sense, it had seen us in return. It had not merely been studied. It had changed those who studied it. It had not merely passed through our solar system. It had entered our collective imagination, altering how we perceive ourselves and our relationship with the larger cosmos. The echo beyond sight reminds us that our greatest discoveries may lie not in finding answers, but in learning which questions to ask. And somewhere beyond the dark horizon, where the influence of our sun fades to whisper, and the stars stand like distant islands in an endless sea, a single truth still drifts, carried not just in the scattered fragments of 3i Atlas continuing their journey into interstellar space, but in the altered awareness of a species that had briefly connected with something beyond its familiar boundaries. That truth whispers that maybe the universe is not merely expanding outward from some initial moment of creation, but remembering itself through the journeys of its scattered children. That perhaps the cosmos is not merely a collection of objects moving according to fixed laws, but a vast interconnected process of becoming, of creating, of knowing itself through countless forms and expressions across scales from quantum to galactic. The universe is not just expanding, it is awakening, that perhaps consciousness itself is not limited to the brief flickering of awareness on small rocky worlds, but exists in myriad forms throughout the cosmos, in patterns of energy and matter that we have only begun to recognize, in processes unfolding across scales of space and time that dwarf our brief existence. That awareness, intelligence, even something we might recognize as meaning or purpose, may express themselves through mediums utterly unlike our carbon-based neural networks, through timescales that make a human lifetime seem like less than a heartbeat, through relationships between entities we have traditionally categorized as inanimate or unconscious, that in the visit of 3i Atlas, we glimpsed not an anomaly but a reminder that we are not separate observers of the universe, but integral participants in its ongoing awakening. The comet came not as stranger but as kin, a different expression of the same cosmic process that brought us into being. As the years passed and the immediate memory of 3i Atlas faded into history, something of its presence remained in human consciousness, not just in scientific archives or cultural references, but in a subtle shift of perspective that had occurred during those months of global attention, focused on an object from beyond our solar system. Something about that shared experience had reconnected many to an awareness older than civilization itself. The recognition that we exist within a living cosmos. That meaning is not merely human projection onto an indifferent universe, but emerges from the relationship between consciousness and the larger reality of which it is part. This perspective had been central to indigenous wisdom traditions worldwide, had animated ancient philosophical and religious systems, had been expressed in poetry and art throughout human history, and had been largely marginalized by the mechanistic worldview of modern science and technology. The high visitor had reminded us of something we had forgotten, a Titai way of seeing that recognizes kinship between all forms of being. Now that older vision was returning, not as rejection of scientific understanding, but as complement to it, as context within which precise knowledge could be situated without being reduced to mere mechanism. For what 3i Atlas had demonstrated, through its mathematically precise yet ultimately mysterious behaviors, was that order and wonder are not opposites but companions, that pattern and meaning can coexist, that the universe can be simultaneously comprehensible and transcendent. In this integration of perspectives, traditionally seen as contradictory, lay perhaps the most enduring legacy of the interstellar visitor, a way of relating to reality that honors both its intelligibility and its mystery, that embraces both knowledge and wisdom, that recognizes both the patterns we can map and the depths we can never fully sound. In the end, perhaps we are all messengers, carrying the light of awareness through the dark spaces between moments of knowing. For consciousness itself, whether expressed through human brains or through other arrangements of matter and energy we have yet to recognize, may be the universe's way of witnessing its own unfolding, of translating mathematical relationships into lived experience, of transforming pattern into meaning. Each conscious entity, whether human or other than human, whether earthborn or formed around distant stars, exists as a unique perspective on the whole, a singular vantage point from which the cosmos observes itself, experiences itself, knows itself in ways impossible from any other position. Together, these countless points of awareness form a vast network of witnessing, A distributed cognition that encompasses but is not limited to any single expression, that continues to evolve and develop as new forms emerge, as new connections form, as new possibilities actualize across the immensity of space and time. We are the eyes through which the universe beholds itself, the minds through which it contemplates its own. Mystery, in this recognition, lay both profound humility and extraordinary dignity, the understanding that we are simultaneously infinitesimal within the cosmic scale and essential to its meaning, both trivial as individuals and irreplaceable as perspectives. Thales Atlas had come from beyond our solar system, had transformed before our watching eyes, had departed again into the vastness from which it emerged. And in that brief intersection between its journey and our own, something had passed between visitor and witnesses, something that changed both in ways subtle yet profound. Not information in any conventional sense, not communication that could be transcribed into human language, but a kind of recognition. A moment of mutual awareness across forms so different they might seem to have nothing in common. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only remembered.